All right, so we have been moving chronologically through the study of American literature, starting at the very beginning of American history with our founding fathers in the Age of Reason, then moving into the 18th century, or rather the 19th century, 18th and 19th century with Romanticism, and now we're moving into Transcendentalism, which has a big name. It sounds kind of scary, but hopefully when you understand the concepts, the ideals, the values, it will be less scary. So Transcendentalism. The time frame, we're now in the mid to late 19th century, so this is directly after Romanticism. You'll notice that they have a lot of the same shared values, but the Transcendentalists are a little bit more extreme. This is kind of our protest era, our damn the man era. So this is a protest against society, state of intellectualism, and organized religion. And I say religion specifically, not beliefs. They definitely had beliefs in a higher power, but they did not like the idea of having an organized religion, calling yourself X, Y, or Z. That third bullet point's really important, and I would make sure to write that down, that they embrace spirituality, which transcends the physical, and transcends is kind of the operative word there because that's where you got the name Transcendentalism. That spirituality is the most important thing. And maybe you've heard people say that before. I'm not a religious person, I'm a spiritual person. That's a transcendentalist idea. They also wanted to ground their beliefs, their philosophy through experiences. So experiences were the most important thing for these people. Other core values, very similar to Romanticism. They cared about the spirit of the individual. It was all about self-examination. Who am I? What am I? Why am I? Very philosophical. They wanted to explore nature, beauty, human nature, humankind, and they oftentimes felt that they were inextricably linked, that you can only figure out who you are if you're connected to nature. And that's where we got our author who went out and lived in a shack in the woods. All of those bullet points are pretty important, so I would make sure to write them down. Individualism, self-examination, nature, super important. Now we're going to take a quick look at one of our other authors and jot some things down about him. He is our first transcendentalist author. His name is Ralph Waldo Emerson. As always, you don't need to write down every single thing. I'll tell you the things that are super important to know about him. I would write down that he's an essayist, meaning what you're reading right now is not going to be a story. It's an essay. It's a compilation of his opinions, his beliefs. It's non-fiction. And he's a social critic. So most of the things that he writes are commentary, things that he believes should be changed or altered about society. I would also write down part of the second bullet point. Because so many of the transcendentalists question things about organized religion, it's important to know that he grew up in a very religious family. He is the son of a minister, and yet he began to question things. Other things to note about Emerson is later on in his life, he became an ordained pastor, so he was not necessarily afraid of organized religion. It was something that happened later on in his life that made him question it. Into his marriage, his wife died 2 years after they got married, and that's when he started to question his religious beliefs. He said, I've given up my life for my faith, and my family has given up so much for my faith, and yet this is what happened. So he started to question God, started questioning his beliefs, and specifically, he didn't like the organized part about religion, that there were rules and regulations and things you had to follow. Specifically, he did not like the idea of communion. And so he started to break away from this concept of organized religion. And it's not up here. Well, the bottom bullet point here is actually really important. I don't know if you've ever heard of agnosticism or being an agnostic, but Emerson was one of the first people to revolutionize this idea of being an agnostic. So an atheist is someone who does not believe that there's a higher power. An agnostic believes in a higher power, but they don't necessarily know who, what, when, why. They don't name it. So they're not, Muslim, they're not Christian, they're not Jewish, they're not Buddhist. They just believe in a higher power. So he was one of the first revolutionary agnostics. So not an atheist, an agnostic. I would write that in your notes. There are a couple other things throughout here that are interesting. It is important to note that Emerson and Thoreau are an author we're going to talk about later. They were really, really good friends, and they encouraged each other's writing. They did have a falling out later on, but they were pretty much BFFs through it all. The piece that you're going to read today is an essay from a longer essay. This is just an excerpt. It's called Self-Reliance, and it is short, but it is mighty. There are, these short little snippets, one sentences, two sentences, that pack so much of a punch. You could honestly talk for an hour about each one individually. So do your best not to just skim through it. Try to see if you can figure out his deeper meaning. What is he really trying to say about being an individual? What is he trying to say about our place in society? What is he trying to say about the world and our outlook on the world? So really try to put on your thinking caps as you go through Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance.